What if we told you that one of the most expensive films ever made nearly destroyed a Hollywood marriage, featured a future spaghetti western legend as an assistant director, and required lions to be starved for 2 weeks, only to have them refuse to attack anyone? From secret affairs that broke up marriages to future superstars appearing as uncredited extras, MGM's epic Quo Vadis hides more scandalous secrets than Nero's palace. Here are the 15 weird facts you didn't know about Quo Vadis. Fact 1. Robert Taylor's affair destroyed his marriage. Robert Taylor's very public romance with Italian extra Lea De Leo during filming became so scandalous that Barbara Stanwyck flew to Rome to confront him, leading to their divorce after 12 years of marriage. In 1950, when Taylor spent most of the year in Rome making Quo Vadis, he indulged in an active social life that included this highly visible relationship with the young Italian starlet, creating a situation that the Hollywood press couldn't ignore. The affair became so blatant that Taylor was even photographed coming out of questionable establishments, and his open dating of De Leo, while still married to one of Hollywood's most respected actresses, created a scandal that reached all the way back to California. Stanwyck, who had initially opposed Taylor's decision to spend 6 months away from home for the production, finally felt compelled to fly to Rome and confront her husband about his behavior and ask for a divorce. What made the situation even more dramatic was that Stanwyck apparently offered the divorce as a threat, expecting Taylor to apologize and recommit to their marriage, but she was shocked and devastated when he immediately accepted her proposal to end their union. The two excellent actors then put on a performance of marital harmony during Stanwyck's several-week stay in Italy, posing for photographers in Rome and Venice and creating the illusion that they were working through their problems. However, behind the scenes they were actually negotiating the terms of their divorce settlement. On February 21, 1951, Barbara Stanwyck officially divorced Robert Taylor, with the settlement granting her 15% of his gross earnings until she remarried or died. The irony was that everyone expected Stanwyck to remarry first, but Taylor died in 1969 while Stanwyck never married again, meaning she continued receiving those payments for the rest of Taylor's life. Fact 2. Sergio Leone was a secret assistant director. Long before Sergio Leone became famous for creating the spaghetti western genre with films like A Fistful of Dollars and The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, he was working behind the scenes on one of Hollywood's biggest epics. In 1951, a 22-year-old Leone served as an uncredited assistant director on Quo Vadis, specifically managing the massive crowds of Italian extras that filled the film's spectacular scenes. What makes this story particularly fascinating is how invisible Leone remained during the entire production. Despite working on the same film set for months, Leone later claimed that he never once met director Mervyn LeRoy or any of the main American stars like Robert Taylor, Deborah Kerr, or Peter Ustinov. This wasn't because he was trying to avoid them, but rather because the production was so enormous and compartmentalized that different crews worked in completely separate areas. Leone's job involved organizing and directing hundreds of Italian extras during the crowd scenes, including the massive Triumph Parade and the arena sequences where Christians faced the lions. While the main stars worked with the primary director and cinematographers, Leone was essentially running his own smaller operation within the larger production, coordinating the local talent that brought authenticity to the Roman crowd scenes. This early experience at Cinecittà Studios proved invaluable for Leone's future career. Working on Quo Vadis taught him how American studios operated and gave him hands-on experience managing large-scale productions with limited budgets. The skills he developed wrangling extras and creating authentic period atmospheres would later serve him well when he began directing his own epic westerns on much smaller budgets. Leone also worked as an uncredited assistant director on another major Hollywood epic filmed in Rome, Ben-Hur, in 1959. These early experiences with American productions at Cinecittà helped him understand how to create big-budget spectacle with Italian resources, knowledge that would prove essential when he later revolutionized the Western genre. Fact 3. The lions refused to eat anyone. One of the most crucial scenes in Quo Vadis involved Christians being thrown to hungry lions in the Roman arena, but the 50 lions that MGM gathered from circuses across Europe had absolutely no interest in cooperating with Hollywood's vision. Despite the studio's desperate attempts to make the big cats appear ferocious and threatening, the lions consistently refused to attack any of the actors during filming. The production team tried everything they could think of to motivate the lions, including the extreme measure of withholding food for 2 full weeks before filming the arena scenes. The logic was simple. Hungry lions would be more aggressive and create the terrifying spectacle that the script demanded. However, even after 14 days without meals, the lions remained completely uninterested in harming anyone and showed no signs of the savage behavior that ancient Roman audiences would have witnessed. Director Mervyn LeRoy became increasingly frustrated with the situation and later admitted his unique predicament with characteristic humor. He confessed that he was probably the only living soul who ever tried to coax a lion into eating somebody. Acknowledging the absurdity of his professional challenge, LeRoy continued to express his bewilderment about how the ancient Romans managed to stage their bloody circus spectacles, since he could never get the scene to work exactly as he had envisioned it. The summer heat in Rome during 1950 made the situation even more difficult, as the lions became even more lethargic and uncooperative in the sweltering temperatures. Animal trainer George Emerson had spent 7 weeks in 1949 and 10 months in 1950 traveling across Europe to find the perfect lions from Ireland, England, France, Spain, Portugal, and other countries, but none of them showed any inclination toward the aggressive behavior the script required. In the final film, viewers can actually spot the evidence of this problem, as some scenes clearly show actors smiling and playing with the supposedly dangerous lions rather than fighting for their lives. Fact 4. Elizabeth Taylor and Sophia Loren were uncredited extras. Two of Hollywood's future biggest stars appeared in Quo Vadis as anonymous background performers, though audiences would have had no idea they were watching future Academy Award winners in tiny, blink-and-you-miss-them roles. Elizabeth Taylor, who was already establishing herself as a rising star at MGM, took an uncredited cameo as a Christian prisoner waiting in the arena dungeons to face the lions, while 17-year-old Sophia Loren appeared as a slave girl gracefully scattering flower petals in the path of Robert Taylor's triumphant chariot procession. For Loren, this small role represented a significant milestone in her career, as Quo Vadis marked her very first appearance in an American film production. Although the movie was shot entirely in Italy at Cinecittà Studios, it was produced by Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer and featured Hollywood's biggest stars, making it technically an American production despite its Italian location. Loren was so briefly visible in the crowd scenes that even dedicated movie fans today have difficulty spotting her among the hundreds of extras filling the elaborate Roman street sets. The casting of these future superstars as extras highlights just how massive the production was and how many people were involved in creating the epic, spectacular crowd scenes. MGM hired thousands of Italian locals to fill the roles of Roman citizens, slaves, and soldiers, and the studio's casting directors had no way of knowing they were hiring future international icons for these tiny background parts. Elizabeth Taylor's involvement was particularly interesting because she had originally been cast in a much larger role as the female lead Lygia back in 1949, when the film was first planned with Gregory Peck as the male lead. When that version of the production fell apart and was restarted with Robert Taylor and Deborah Kerr in the leading roles, Taylor ended up with just this small cameo appearance instead. Even Sophia Loren's mother, Romilda Villani, managed to secure a small uncredited role as another slave girl, making the Loren family's involvement in the film a true family affair. Fact 5. Christopher Lee drove a chariot. Long before Christopher Lee became famous for playing Dracula in Hammer horror films or wielding a lightsaber as Count Dooku in the Star Wars prequels, he was just another aspiring actor taking whatever work he could find in 1951 Rome. Lee appeared uncredited in Quo Vadis as a chariot driver, handling the reins and horses during some of the film's most spectacular action sequences, though audiences would have had no idea they were watching a future horror legend in action. At the time of filming, Lee was 29 years old and still struggling to establish himself as a serious actor in the British film industry. Taking a small role in a major Hollywood production like Quo Vadis represented exactly the kind of opportunity that young actors needed to gain experience and make connections in the entertainment business. The fact that the role was uncredited didn't matter much to Lee, who was simply grateful for the chance to work on such an enormous and prestigious production. Lee's role as a chariot driver would have required actual skill and physical coordination, as the chariot scenes in Quo Vadis used real horses and chariots rather than relying entirely on special effects or stunt doubles. The production employed 10 specially hand-carved chariots for the film, and managing these vehicles safely during the elaborate parade and racing sequences required experienced horsemen who could handle the animals while also following the director's instructions for the scene. Quo Vadis served as an early training ground for numerous future stars who would go on to achieve international fame in completely different types of roles. The film's massive scale meant that hundreds of performers were needed for crowd scenes, battle sequences, and ceremonial processions, creating opportunities for young actors to gain valuable experience working on a major studio production. Lee's small role driving a chariot was just one example of how the film industry operated in the 1950s, when even tiny, uncredited parts could provide crucial stepping stones for ambitious performers. Fact 6. Robert Taylor's chest hair was too sexy. MGM studio executives became concerned that Robert Taylor's naturally hairy chest might be too distracting and sensual for audiences watching a religious epic, so they reportedly ordered him to shave it off before filming his shirtless scenes in Quo Vadis. The studio bosses worried that Taylor's masculine chest hair would draw attention away from the film's spiritual themes and make the movie feel more like a steamy romance than a serious biblical drama about early Christianity in ancient Rome. This decision reflects the strange and often absurd level of control that major Hollywood studios exercised over every aspect of their stars' appearances during the 1950s. Studio executives regularly made detailed demands about how their leading men should look, from their hairstyles and clothing to more intimate details like body hair, all in service of creating the exact image they believed would appeal to moviegoers and fit the tone of each particular film. The irony of this grooming requirement becomes immediately apparent to anyone who watches Quo Vadis today, because Taylor's chest hair is clearly visible in both of his major shirtless scenes in the final version of the movie. Whether Taylor ignored the studio's orders, the hair grew back between filming sessions, or the executives simply changed their minds, the evidence on screen suggests that either the shaving never happened or it was completely ineffective. Taylor's beefcake moments in the film include a bathing scene where he demonstrates the authentic Roman practice of using oil and a curved scraping tool called a strigil instead of soap, as well as scenes where he appears in traditional Roman military dress that exposed much of his upper body. These sequences were designed to showcase Taylor's physical appeal while also providing some historical authenticity about Roman grooming and military customs. The whole episode demonstrates how studio executives often worried about seemingly minor details that audiences probably would never have noticed or cared about, while also highlighting the sometimes contradictory nature of Hollywood's approach to male sexuality in biblical epics. Fact 7. The film used a record 32,000 costumes. Quo Vadis officially holds the record for using more costumes in a single movie than any other film in history, with an incredible 32,000 individual garments created specifically for the production. This staggering number wasn't just a matter of studio excess or showing off, but rather a practical necessity for creating the massive crowd scenes that filled ancient Rome with thousands of soldiers, citizens, slaves, and nobles throughout the epic's nearly 3-hour runtime. The scale of the costume operation required over 52,400 yards of specially woven fabric, much of it created using traditional techniques to achieve the authentic look and feel of first-century Roman clothing. MGM couldn't simply order these materials from regular suppliers, so they contracted with various textile firms across Italy, who then distributed the work to countless housewives throughout the country who hand-wove and hand-sewed the garments in their own homes, using patterns and specifications provided by the studio's costume department. The footwear alone represented a massive undertaking, with 15,000 pairs of sandals all constructed by hand using traditional leather-working methods to ensure historical accuracy. Beyond the basic clothing and shoes, the costume department also had to create 13,000 pieces of jewelry, 4,000 helmets made from brass, aluminum, and tin, 4,000 breastplates for the Roman soldiers, 2,000 shields, and 21,700 water bottles to complete the authentic military equipment that the extras needed for the battle and parade sequences. This enormous costume operation took months to complete and required careful coordination between MGM's Hollywood designers and Italian craftspeople who understood traditional manufacturing techniques. The studio's research department had spent years during World War II compiling historical data about Roman clothing, armor, and accessories, using photographs of actual artifacts from Italian museums to ensure that every detail would be as authentic as possible when filming finally began in 1950. Fact 8. Anthony Mann secretly directed the burning of Rome. One of the most spectacular and memorable sequences in Quo Vadis was actually directed by someone other than the film's official director, Mervyn LeRoy. Anthony Mann, who would later become famous for directing classic westerns like Winchester 73 and The Man from Laramie, worked as an uncredited second-unit director and took complete control of filming the dramatic burning of Rome sequence that serves as the movie's climactic disaster scene. Mann spent 24 consecutive nights on the Cinecittà backlot directing this elaborate sequence, which required building an entire section of ancient Rome just so it could be burned down for the cameras. The production team constructed a 4-block area filled with authentic-looking Roman buildings, complete with hidden pipes throughout the structures that would feed the flames during filming, creating one of the most realistic fire sequences ever captured on film. The burning of Rome sequence was so complex and dangerous that it required its own separate crew and director, which is why MGM brought in Mann to handle this specific portion of the production, while Leroy continued working with the main cast on other scenes. Mann's experience with action sequences and his ability to coordinate large-scale practical effects made him the perfect choice for managing the logistical challenges of safely burning down an entire movie set while capturing dramatic footage from multiple camera angles. The sequence also employed numerous assistant directors to help coordinate the hundreds of extras who had to react to the spreading flames while maintaining their safety throughout the night shoots. Among these assistant directors was the young Sergio Leone, who gained valuable experience working on large-scale action sequences that would later influence his own approach to directing epic scenes in his spaghetti westerns. Mann's contribution to Quo Vadis demonstrates how major studio productions often relied on multiple directors with different specialties to handle various aspects of complex films, even though only one director typically received official credit for the entire movie. Fact 9. The lions could see through the film. Several of the arena scenes in Quo Vadis feature lions that appear strangely transparent, as if they're ghostly apparitions rather than real animals, due to technical problems with the early blue-screen compositing technology that MGM was experimenting with during production. This unintentionally supernatural effect occurred when the studio tried to combine footage of the lions shot separately with scenes of the actors and crowd in the Colosseum, but the primitive special effects technology of 1951 wasn't sophisticated enough to seamlessly blend the different pieces of film together. Blue screen technology, which allows filmmakers to place actors or objects against different backgrounds by filming them in front of a solid blue backdrop, was still in its experimental stages during the early 1950s. The process required precise lighting and color matching to work properly, and even small mistakes in the technical setup could result in portions of the composite image appearing semi-transparent or completely invisible in the final footage. When the lions were filmed against blue screens and then composited into the arena scenes, the color matching process failed in several shots, causing parts of the animals to blend with the background and creating the eerie see-through effect that sharp-eyed viewers can still spot in the finished movie. The problem was particularly noticeable when the lions first emerged from their cages onto the arena floor, where careful observers can literally see through portions of the big cats as they move across the sand. Rather than reshoot these expensive and difficult sequences, MGM decided to leave the flawed composite shots in the final version of the film, probably hoping that audiences would be too caught up in the drama and spectacle to notice the technical glitches. The studio may also have calculated that the cost and time required to fix these problems wasn't worth the expense, especially since the overall effect of the arena scenes was still dramatically powerful despite the ghostly lions floating through some of the shots. Fact 10. Audrey Hepburn auditioned and was rejected. Among the many actresses who tried out for roles in Quo Vadis was a young and virtually unknown Audrey Hepburn, who was passed over by MGM's casting directors and missed what could have been her big break into major Hollywood productions. At the time of the auditions in 1949 and 1950, Hepburn was still working as a chorus girl and small-part actress in London, taking whatever theatrical work she could find while hoping for her chance to break into the movie business. Hepburn's rejection by the Quo Vadis casting team represents one of those fascinating what-if moments in Hollywood history where a future superstar was overlooked by studio executives who couldn't see her potential for international stardom. The casting directors were looking for actresses who could handle the epic's dramatic scope and fit into the world of ancient Rome, but they apparently didn't think that Hepburn's delicate features and ballet-trained elegance were right for the sweeping historical drama they were trying to create. The irony of this missed opportunity becomes even more striking when you consider that Hepburn would achieve worldwide fame just 2 years later with her breakthrough performance in Roman Holiday in 1953, a film that would earn her an Academy Award for Best Actress and establish her as one of the most beloved stars of her generation. Her natural grace, charm, and ability to convey both vulnerability and strength would have brought exactly the qualities that Quo Vadis needed for its portrayal of early Christian converts facing persecution in ancient Rome. If Hepburn had been cast in Quo Vadis, her career trajectory might have been completely different, potentially leading to more dramatic roles in historical epics rather than the romantic comedies and sophisticated dramas that became her specialty. The rejection also highlights how unpredictable the casting process can be, with studio executives sometimes failing to recognize talent that seems obvious in retrospect, especially when dealing with newcomers who haven't yet developed their signature screen presence. Fact 11. The director accidentally quoted his own gangster film. Director Mervyn LeRoy gave Emperor Nero an exit line that sounds remarkably similar to dialogue from his own 1931 gangster classic, Little Caesar, creating an unintentionally humorous connection between the ancient Roman tyrant and Edward G. Robinson's iconic mobster character. This odd parallel was noticed by film critics and historians who were familiar with both movies, and it suggests that LeRoy may have been having a bit of fun with the epic's dramatic dialogue, or simply drawing from his own previous work without realizing how similar the lines sounded. LeRoy had directed Little Caesar 20 years earlier, launching Edward G. Robinson to stardom as Rico Bandello, a ruthless gangster whose final moments became one of the most memorable death scenes in early Hollywood cinema. The fact that LeRoy unconsciously echoed this earlier dialogue when crafting Nero's final scene indicates that certain dramatic phrases and rhythms had become deeply embedded in his filmmaking vocabulary over the course of his long career. Film scholar Sir Christopher Frayling, who provided commentary for later home video releases of Quo Vadis, found this connection particularly amusing, and noted that it revealed something about how seriously the filmmakers were taking their historical epic. The parallel between a Roman emperor and a Chicago gangster wasn't necessarily intentional, but it highlighted the somewhat playful attitude that Hollywood directors sometimes brought to these massive biblical and historical productions. The similarity in dialogue also reflects the broader Hollywood tradition of recycling successful dramatic formulas across different genres and time periods. Directors and screenwriters often drew inspiration from their previous successes, sometimes unconsciously incorporating elements that had worked well in earlier films, regardless of whether those elements fit perfectly into their new projects. This kind of self-referential filmmaking was fairly common in the studio system, where directors worked on many different types of movies throughout their careers, and sometimes found their various projects influencing each other in unexpected ways, creating accidental connections between completely different stories and genres. Fact 12. Sophia Loren's mother also got a role. The Loren family's involvement in Quo Vadis extended beyond just 17-year-old Sophia's small role as a slave girl scattering flower petals, because her mother Romilda Villani also managed to secure her own uncredited part as another slave girl in the epic production. This mother-daughter casting represented a genuine family affair for the future Italian cinema icon, with both women working together on what would become Sophia's first American film production, even though the movie was shot entirely in Italy. Romilda Villani had been a piano teacher and aspiring actress herself before focusing on raising her daughters, so the opportunity to appear in a major Hollywood production alongside her talented daughter must have been particularly meaningful for her personally. The fact that both mother and daughter were cast in similar roles as Roman slaves suggests that the casting directors saw a family resemblance and decided to use them in related scenes, though their appearances were so brief that most viewers would never notice the connection. For the Loren family, these small roles in Quo Vadis represented much more than just brief appearances in a crowd scene. At the time, Sophia was still using her birth name Sofia Ciccolone and was just beginning to work in Italian films, while her mother was supporting the family through various jobs after Sophia's father had abandoned them years earlier. Being cast in an MGM production, even in tiny uncredited roles, provided both women with valuable experience working on a major international film set and gave them connections within the Italian film industry. The mother-daughter collaboration on Quo Vadis also highlights how the massive scale of the production created opportunities for entire families to participate in the filmmaking process. With thousands of extras needed for the crowd scenes, MGM's casting directors were actively recruiting local Italian families who could provide authentic Mediterranean features for the Roman citizens, slaves, and soldiers that filled the epic's spectacular sequences. Fact 13. Clark Gable refused the lead role. Clark Gable, one of Hollywood's biggest stars and the legendary leading man from Gone with the Wind, turned down the opportunity to play Marcus Vinicius in Quo Vadis because he believed that wearing a Roman toga and ancient military costume would make him look absolutely ridiculous on screen. Gable's rejection of this prestigious role opened the door for Robert Taylor to step in and take what would become one of his most memorable performances in an epic that saved MGM from financial disaster. Gable's concerns about the costume requirements weren't entirely unreasonable, considering that his entire screen persona was built around his modern American masculinity and his ability to wear contemporary clothing with natural confidence and charm. The idea of trading his signature suits and casual wear for sandals, short tunics, and Roman armor apparently struck him as potentially damaging to the carefully crafted image that had made him one of the most popular actors in the world. This casting decision also reflects the different approaches that major stars took when considering roles in historical epics during the 1950s. While some actors embraced the opportunity to appear in large-scale productions that showcased their dramatic abilities and physical presence, others worried that period costumes might make them appear less appealing or believable to audiences who were accustomed to seeing them in modern settings. Robert Taylor's willingness to take on the role proved to be a smart career move, as Quo Vadis became one of the highest-grossing films of 1951 and helped establish Taylor as a leading man capable of handling both contemporary dramas and historical epics. Taylor's comfort with the Roman military costumes and his natural authority in the role demonstrated that he understood how to adapt his screen presence to different time periods and genres. Gable's decision to pass on Quo Vadis also allowed him to focus on other projects that better suited his established persona, though he would later appear in historical films when the right opportunities came along. Fact 14. They used a decommissioned warship's generator. Cinecittà Studios in Rome simply didn't have enough electrical power to handle the massive lighting requirements for Quo Vadis, forcing MGM to get creative about finding additional generators to keep their $7 million production running smoothly. The studio had to import a reported 200 tons of generators, lights, and other electrical equipment from their facilities in Culver City, California, but even that enormous shipment wasn't enough to meet the power demands of filming an epic with thousands of extras across multiple massive sets. The situation became so desperate that MGM's production team actually requisitioned a generator from a decommissioned Italian warship, bringing military-grade naval equipment into service for Hollywood filmmaking. This unusual solution highlights just how unprepared the Italian film industry was for the scale of American studio productions in the early 1950s, even though Cinecittà had been built during the 1930s as part of Mussolini's plan to make Rome a major center for international cinema. The power shortage problems weren't just about running lights and cameras, but also about operating all the specialized equipment that MGM needed to create the film's elaborate special effects, including the blue screen technology that was being used to composite different shots together. The studio also needed consistent electrical power for their sound recording equipment, editing facilities, and the various workshops where craftspeople were building sets, costumes, and props throughout the lengthy production schedule. The generators shipped from England provided additional backup power, but the fact that MGM had to scavenge electrical equipment from a military vessel demonstrates how the production pushed the limits of what was technically possible in post-war Italy. Cinecittà had been used as a refugee camp and military barracks during World War II, and the studio facilities were still being rebuilt and modernized when the Quo Vadis production arrived, creating infrastructure challenges that required innovative solutions like borrowing power equipment from the Italian Navy. Fact 15. The original score was lost in a fire. Composer Miklos Rosa's complete original recordings of his Quo Vadis score, performed by the prestigious Royal Philharmonic Orchestra at MGM's British studios in 1951, were reportedly destroyed in a devastating fire at the studio's Culver City facilities sometime after the film's release. This tragic loss meant that one of the most elaborate and expensive film scores of the early 1950s disappeared forever, leaving only the partial recordings that had been mixed with sound effects for the actual movie soundtrack. Rosa had spent months composing an epic musical score that matched the grandeur and scope of the film itself, creating themes for the major characters and sweeping orchestral pieces for the battle scenes, romantic moments, and religious sequences that filled the nearly 3-hour runtime. The composer worked closely with the Royal Philharmonic Orchestra to record the complete score in pristine studio conditions, capturing every nuance of the orchestral performance without the interference of sound effects, dialogue, or ambient noise that would be added later. The fire at MGM's Culver City studios destroyed not only the Quo Vadis recordings, but also countless other musical recordings and film materials that the studio had accumulated over decades of production. However, fortunately for film music enthusiasts, the dub-downs of about 2/3 of Ross's original recordings that were actually used in the final film survived because they had been stored separately as part of the movie's soundtrack elements. In 1951, MGM Records had the foresight to issue gramophone records featuring 12 tracks from the original soundtrack music without sound effects, preserving some of Ross's work for posterity. These surviving elements were later collected and reissued on compact discs in 2009 by Film Score Monthly, allowing modern audiences to experience at least portions of the composer's original vision for this epic score, even though the complete Royal Philharmonic Orchestra recordings remain lost forever.